Many cookbooks promise to make us better, or at least more confident cooks. But today we're talking to an author who's written a book that promises to teach us mastery. Welcome to Everything Cookbooks, the podcast for writers, readers, and cooks. This is Molly Stevens, and today I am here with Andrea Nguyen.
Hey, Molly.
Hey. So
that authority business, we talked about that.
Yeah.
Oh, even the word mastery, there for a while, like that word was kind of blacklisted.
Right. For some reasons, lots of reasons. But writing big books, I know people think of you as an authority. Vietnamese cooking, your books stand the test of time. They're backlisted. I mean, did you know when you were writing Into the Vietnamese Kitchen, it would be a backlist?
No, I just thought I would need to write a really good book because I never knew I would have the opportunity to write another cookbook, right? I mean, same thing with you, but I mean, roasting, braising.
Yeah. I didn't think I was writing a book that would have this authority. The first book, didn't know if I'd ever get to write another book. And I was just going to write my heart out and teach my heart out because that's what I thought you did for books.
Right. And then they become the reference book.
Right.
And, even when I did my single subject books, tofu, dumplings, banh mi, and pho, I was like, I get this one chance to just like nerd out and help people understand this food, the cuisine, the culture. So this is my shot. So in a way, I write out of fear.
Right. No, I totally get that. Same. But it's also this single subject thing, I think. It's because a lot of cookbooks are, weeknight cooking or simple suppers, and they're sort of a general book and you pull it down full of ideas. But to write a book that takes on one topic, the author we're going to talk to today, Joe Yonan, has written a book called Mastering the Art of Plant-Based Cooking. So one, mastering upfront. I mean, you're revoking Julia Child right there if you say you're mastering the art. I mean, mastering the art of French cooking, right?
But then plant-based, there's like so much now on plant-based.
Right.
And so many ways that people are coming at it.
Well, your last book, Evergreen Vietnamese, Plant Forward.
I just wanted to take a look at traditional Vietnamese cooking, and it was all plant forward, but, do my modern take on it. And I felt like I had this opportunity to present this cuisine in all of its plant-driven beautifulness and deliciousness, but it wasn't a vegan book.
Right.
And it wasn't a vegetarian book. And there have been a lot of vegetable-focused books coming out by people who are vegetarian, vegan, or flexitarians. And Joe has done something oddly wonderful and oddly risky.
Yeah. Bold. I just keep thinking.
Bold.
Yeah.
It's a big one.
It's a big book. Came out in the fall of 2024. Joe Yonan is the food and dining editor at the Washington Post. He writes a weeknight vegetarian column at the Post, and he's written 5 cookbooks. This is his 5th cookbook. Cool Beans came out right during the pandemic. Got a lot of great press. Wonderful book. He wrote Eat Your Vegetables, Serve Yourself. So nothing really of this magnitude. And we are going to bring Joe on and find out why and how he did it. Well, Joe Yonan, welcome to Everything Cookbooks.
Thank you for having me. Love talking to you guys.
We are so excited to talk to you. Yes. I mean, congratulations on this book. I know it's been out for a few months, but boy, oh boy.
Thank you.
It's a big one.
This is large. Yeah, large and in charge.
You say it yourself in the acknowledgments. You say that it's the biggest and most ambitious book you've written.
Yes.
Nearly 500 pages, over 300 recipes. I mean, it's got a textbook-like heft to it, but more to the point, it's ambitious in its breadth and its depth in terms of the content. So, Joe, why?
Yeah, we want to know
why. I've asked myself that many times over the last few years. I really wanted to write something that I thought would make an impact. And not that, I guess I always want to do that, but the last book I wrote, Cool Beans, was super fun, and I loved doing it, and it did well, partly because we had a global pandemic in which everybody stockpiled beans and didn't know what to do with them. But I really, it's single subject, and my books have mostly been fairly niche. Like before Cool Beans, they were aimed at cooking for one. And I just wanted to do something. I mean, I don't want to sound too full of myself or too whatever, but I just wanted to write something that I thought might at least stand a chance at being a classic.
Nice.
I wanted to go big. And I had this feeling for a while that there was a way to talk about plant-based cooking that I hadn't really seen, which was to really concentrate on the cooking and to concentrate on it as a cuisine more so than a lifestyle choice or anything. You know, I had sort of gotten tired of seeing the dialogue around vegan and vegetarian cooking always ending up being about identity and who's right and who's wrong and who's killing the planet and who's saving the planet and I just thought that the food was getting lost a little bit. So I wanted to do something that really celebrated it as a cuisine unto itself. And that would hopefully draw people who aren't even necessarily identifying as any of those things, that they're just curious modern cooks who want to know how to do this type of cooking better, the same way that, well, it's so funny. I told you, Andrea, I've name dropped you a little bit when I've talked about this because I've said, if you want to learn how to make the best, say, fresh Vietnamese spring rolls, you don't feel like you have to renounce your U.S. citizenship and move to Vietnam and tell all your friends that you're never making anything but Vietnamese food for the rest of your life. You read one of Andrea's books. You can visit. You can watch videos. You can get her newsletter. You can have all sorts of entry points to understand it as a cuisine just because you're interested, because it's delicious, because it's fascinating, because it's a different way than maybe you've cooked before. And so I wanted to write something that did the same thing for plant-based cooking, that told people, look, this is an interesting way of cooking, and there are some tips and tricks that can help you do it deliciously.
That's so interesting, Joe, because, it's this shift from thinking about veganism and plant-based cooking that is identity-oriented.
Yes.
Of all of the various niches in cookbook writing, vegan cookbooks has been like the most polarizing, right?
Yes.
I mean, you and I had this conversation back when Evergreen Vietnamese came out, and I was like, holy smokes, I wrote a flexitarian book. I didn't write a vegan book. And it says plant-based, but everyone's like, it's got to be vegan. Or we're going to, like throw daikon at you or something. I mean,
Right.
It's like this thing of this strident aspect of plant-based cooking and who owns it and who doesn't and who's trespassing.
Right.
And at what point did you say, I'm just going to knock down that fence? What was that moment?
Well, I think it came to me when I was promoting previous books, and I would always get someone who would come up to me at the end of a talk, like at the signing, and they would get real close and they would drop their voice down to this conspiratorial whisper, and they would say, I really want to be vegetarian or vegan, but here's the thing, I'm just afraid that every now and then I'm going to want to have a steak. And I would always do the same thing. I would lean in, I would drop my voice down to a whisper, and I would go, here's the secret. Be a vegetarian and every now and then have a steak. And they would look at me like I was nuts because, they didn't expect me to allow for any kind of variability or flexibility. And my whole point is, of course, that it's all very personal and that you can draw these lines wherever you want and however they work for you. And so I think that was a big part of it. Like, I didn't want to write a book in which I made the case for veganism.
Right.
I think it does end up making the case for veganism because it demonstrates how delicious it can be. And I wanted to do that. But I wanted to aim something at people who might want to eat plant-based meals for whatever reason and for however often. I mean, maybe it's just because you're curious about you want to learn how to fry tofu. Maybe it's that you've got, somebody coming over for a dinner party and that they eat that way, that they're vegan or vegetarian. Maybe it's a new son or daughter-in-law, or maybe your kid just, realized that chickens are animals and said they're not going to do it again, or maybe it's January and you want to reset maybe for a month, or maybe you're trying to do a certain number of plant-based meals a week or whatever. I mean, that's what I was after.
I really hear that, and I love it's one of the things is that you're not dogmatic in your approach to it.
Yeah.
You're not saying you're not preaching. It's about the pleasure of food, and this is good tasting food, and that veganism is a cuisine unto itself. And we'll talk, I hope, later about sort of the global approach of the book as well. But you chose not to do something that we're seeing, like we another guest on the podcast, Jenny Rosenstruck, who does weeknight vegetarian, not vegan, but still. So that's that we're going to eat less meat, or even Andrea, your latest book, we're eating less meat, we're eating more plant forward. But you went a step beyond that, and then you created this book with 80 building block recipes. So you're not just giving us ways to incorporate a plant-based diet or plant-based recipes into it, but you're teaching us how to make things from scratch. We're making miso where there's no tech meat here. There's no MSG.
Right.
That building block chapter, I've never seen anything like it. I've seen it in, other encyclopedic books that are on my cookbook shelf, but certainly none.
It's big, yeah.
Those are almost two different things that you're doing in a way.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, because, when I was at the photo shoot, and even with my editor, we talked a lot about how different aspects of the book kind of fell into different parts of the title. So, there are the things that I really felt like were mastering. There are the things that I felt like were the art. There are the things, obviously everything's plant-based. But to me, the building blocks are the art of plant-based cooking. So it shows that, certainly there's all sorts of store-bought products that you can get now, and they're better and better. But I just wanted to remind people that there's a history to this, that there are incredible ways to make a lot of these products that aren't really difficult. We just never think of it. Like, we haven't incorporated them into our regular routine, and it's so easy to buy things, and we're all stretched for time. And so I'm not saying that, you have to make miso if you're going to use miso, but I just wanted to remind people that miso is simple. It is not difficult to make. It just takes some time, and you're just letting it sit there for a while, and it lasts forever. And it's not fresh, I guess, by the time you've let it age for a while, but homemade miso is really different from a lot of the stuff that you're gonna get. I mean, there's beautiful misos out there that are made from small artisanal companies that.
But doesn't learning how to make it yourself make you then understand why there are artisanal misos instead of like it's a whole next level of understanding your ingredients, right? Like you're making your own cashew butter or milk instead of buying it.
I think that's right. That's right. And then you appreciate those really excellent products all that much more. So, and I wanted to show people, I have an extensive spice blends in the building block chapter, and it's not one of those situations where I used every one of them in a recipe later. I didn't want that to be the point. Like, I didn't want it to be like, you need to make, za'atar because you have to make it in order to make this flatbread later. I wanted to say, you should make za'atar because it's just great to have around for all sorts of things. And there's a bunch of spice. I think there's like 16 spice blends in the book. And to me, that's just like, if you learn how to, make spice blends, I just feel like you have access to all the cuisines of the world. If you make a spice blend, you can have the same base ingredient like roasted potatoes, and you can sprinkle it with one of 16 spice blends, and you've moved those potatoes all around the world. I think that's miraculous.
It's like the whole bit on all the crispies, the crisps, or whatever. There's an extensive section on making things that are crisp and crunchy to put on top of various things.
Right.
Yeah. Editorially, we have those editors, those pesky editors and copy editors who are like always like trying to rein us in and telling us what's what. So when you set up the framework for this book, were you imagining that building blocks to be that big, and what was their reaction to it? Because it hits you so hard, and that's actually for me the most fascinating part of your book, because I am a maker.
Yes.
Or I want to know.
I know, right?
And the next time I look at something called coconut bacon bits, I'm like,
Right.
that's so easy.
I can do
Or
that.
pumfu, which I recently saw on a trip to the
Oh,
American South. I bought some because I was like, Joe has a recipe for making this in his book.
it's so
And I
good.
want to know what the deal is
We're
with it.
talking about pumpkin seed tofu for those of you who don't know. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, y'all, like whoever that's in, the Southeast or the East Coast, you can find it at your grocery store, and it comes from the middle of the country. But I mean, those are these kinds of discoveries. But at the same time, it's kind of like, is that mastering? How they're always like, where is this used elsewhere?
I know. If
Right.
I was an editor, I think I would have flagged it and said, Joe, you've got this recipe for a spice rub. We never use it.
I know.
But I kind of love that you went and did it.
I did it, and I got it past him.
Mhm.
I kind of got it past him. I mean, there's some things that, of course, are used later, like a lot of the milks and the butters and
The cider.
the
Yeah.
cider. The cider syrup is used in a baklava later. But I know that you can both identify with this. I really hate it when I'm looking at a cookbook and I get excited about a recipe and I assess the number of ingredients or make a quick judgment about how much time it's going to take, and I decide to make it, and then I realize, oh, I forgot to include the sub recipes in my calculation, and you have to go make the sub recipe in order to make that book. And I hate that as a reader, and yet there is also, of course, this natural impulse to use everything in the book. But I think in some ways we are maybe thinking a little bit too highly of ourselves when we imagine that a cookbook is this all encompassing piece of work and that people are going to be using it and only it,
And no
right?
other book. Yeah.
And no
This is
other book.
all they could cook from. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what strikes me about that. I mean, every time I called for a sub recipe in the book, with maybe just a couple exceptions, I gave you a store-bought option. No, I think every time, like with the salted baklava that uses this cider wildflower syrup, which is one of my favorite recipes in the book.
I feel like in some of your baking recipes, the store-bought version,
Butter, for
the
example.
butter doesn't work as well, or maybe you
Yes.
call out which would work better.
Yes. But I want people to have options when they make these things. So like you could use agave nectar if you don't eat honey, because vegans don't eat honey because it's an animal byproduct. If you don't eat honey, you can certainly use agave nectar if you don't have the cider syrup or haven't made it. But if you have time to make it, it's so good. So yeah, I was lucky to have a fabulous editor at 10 Speed Press, Kelly Snowden. And she comes at things from a journalistic perspective, which is one of the reasons why I think she and I, get along so well. She doesn't want to fall into a lot of sort of tropes of cookbooks. And I think she likes it when you have kind of a different sensibility or an out of the box kind of idea. I think she has a lot of respect for that. So yeah, I didn't get any pushback on that idea really at all.
Well, I got to say, in this sort of era of, there's so many, simple, easy weeknight,
Right.
cookbooks are just being churned. And for obvious reasons, people are looking for that. To get something like this is just like, it makes you stop and go, wow, okay.
Yeah.
But this is an interesting juncture for us to talk about the difference between a front list and a backlist book. When you tackle something that you hope will be a classic, that will endure, versus a book that you're just like, hey, just weeknight, do it, mishmash it up and it's delicious and feed your family.
Right.
Those books have their place. But what are you signing up for when you say you want to make a classic? Because all three of us have done that.
Right. No, you both absolutely have. You've written some of my favorite books. And I'm not just saying that because I'm here. I've said that elsewhere.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
I think it's such an interesting question. I mean, one of the things that we talk about sometimes when we're trying to figure out, strategies for what stories we're going to write at the Post, one of the criteria is, being in the conversation that's trendy or whatever. And one of the ideas is that you be a conversation starter, that you're like one of the first people to maybe bring something up to people's attention that they maybe haven't seen before. But one of the other criteria is that you're the conversation ender, meaning you do such a complete and interesting and deep analysis of something or explanation of something that there needs to be no other conversation about it. Like you've defined it, you've ended the conversation. And the latter is the kind of thing that I think I was thinking about when I thought about trying to write something that was a classic. I say that, but at the same time, I purposefully chose this title partly for, of course, its reference to Julia and for the ambition that I think it signifies, but also because my favorite part of the title, and this is one of the reasons that Judith Jones went for it, and one of the things she loved about it was the mastering part, that it's a gerund, that it's not how to master the art of plant-based cooking. It is mastering the art. It's a process. It's an ongoing process. So in that way, even though I said, I wanted to be a conversation ender, I'm also saying this is a never-ending conversation, right. But I want to give people enough information and techniques and tips and ideas and recipes to feel like they have everything they need to really explore this kind of cooking, that they don't necessarily need anything else. Now, I'm not saying that, as we were saying earlier, I'm not saying that they're never going to look at another book, but I want them to feel like this book can get them through just about anything in this type of cooking that they might be wondering about. Yeah. I mean, one of the other terms I think you probably have also both heard is category killer. That's what my agent was calling it. I want it to be a category killer. Now, do I really want to kill? I don't really want nobody to ever be able to write a plant-based.
Yeah, that sounds anti-veganism.
I know,
yes.
I know. Well, the nickname for the book at 10 Speed was The Beast, which is highly ironic for a plant-based cookbook, isn't it?
All right.
But that idea that you want to sort of be the definitive word on a topic.
You used the word complete before, and I think comprehensive comes up often in describing this book. And, category killer is, I don't love the term either, but
it's very aggressive.
Yes, it's pretty aggressive. But what it's saying is it's going to hold a place in this category no matter, the hope is, I imagine, that there will be more books on vegan cooking and more plant-based books, but they will all be held up to this book if it truly succeeds in its ambition, and that it will stand the test of time is something
right.
that you're really trying to do, I think, what we're doing these, but that anything that comes after will be referenced to this book. So
That's right. It's just like no one can say, I'm going to write a book about braising and not be referencing all about braising. So yeah, I hope that that's the key.
Yeah, I think about it as like planting flags, right? It's
like
yeah. Staking your ground. You're like, all right, I'm doing it, and I'm going to plant, my flag really deep.
Yeah.
But also finding a category that no one's done that before.
That's right.
That's the thing. It's not just a personal, obviously there's some personal ambition involved with doing this, but it's not just you looking around for, nobody's written a really big book on donuts. I'm going to go all in. It's something that you have a lot of experience in.
That's right.
I think it's really important to be clear about that. The other thing is you mentioned your journalistic experience and sensibility, and your experience at the Washington Post and, in Boston before that. You're working with so many cooks and food writers over the years, being aware of so many restaurants, you being well-traveled. That is such an important part of how this book came together.
That's absolutely right.
You don't come at it from, I sit here in my little, cubicle up in Vermont, but your lens is so broad, right? And I think it's a unique perspective that you're able to bring to this world.
Yeah, I think some people have asked me, how long did it take you to write this book? And I say, well, it was 3 years from the time I got the contract until the time I turned to the manuscript, but it was a lifetime. Absolutely a lifetime, honestly.
Right.
So you're at the Post, got a family, a teenager.
Oof.
We're in the pandemic, and you've got to tackle this beast. Now, we noticed that you mentioned a number of people who help you manage the project.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Our listeners, we want to know how stuff works, how the the vegan sausage gets made. Right?
How's the tempeh get made?
Good catch there, yeah.
Yeah, and so, you mentioned people like Sherry Codiana and Kristen Hartke and lead testers too. What did they do for you, and how did they help you make the book?
Sherry helped me with Cool Beans, and it was Sherry and I are old friends. We met at IACP conference, I don't know, more than 10 years ago. And we just hit it off immediately. We were always in the back of the conference, of the different panels, like making jokes. We were the bad kids.
I don't know what you're talking about.
I think you do. You both are the same way. You're the same way, like making little cracks under your breath about the people.
Never.
To us.
And she has a really interesting background in tech, and she's super organized. And she's also done a lot of recipe work on cookbooks. Like she did a lot of recipe work on the Tartine book and others by that team. I was overwhelmed by my work with Cool Beans, and I just was at this point where I don't know. I just felt like there was no way I could get it done. I called her to see if she was interested in maybe testing some recipes. And I was also sort of venting to her about, where I was in the process and just how I was so like, I don't know. And she said, well, it sounds to me like you don't need a recipe tester, you need a project manager. And I was like, oh, please say more. And she described what she would do, which is basically, make a spreadsheet and help me track all the recipes and what was in them. And I said, yeah, absolutely, let's do it. And it was a game changer, because it allowed me, especially as someone who's saying, I have a busy full-time job, I'm trying to feed a family, it allowed me to not have to worry about a lot of those structural things and just concentrate on the idea generation. And that was huge. It was huge. My creativity skyrocketed once she started doing that. And that book was only, 125 recipes.
Right. That spreadsheet, I love what you say about tracking what's in the recipes too.
Yeah.
So suddenly you realize it's something we all fall into. I've just used rosemary, lemon, and garlic in the last 6 recipes in this book. And she could say, oh, we got to mix it up.
That's absolutely right. Like for me, that moment was, and this is no surprise to me, this is exactly, of course, what would happen. I realized at a certain point with Cool Beans that I'm like, oh my God, I think it's 1/3 chickpeas. Like I need to reevaluate this, When I had the idea for mastering, honestly, I wouldn't even write the proposal until I knew whether she would help me with it. And I reached out to her and I said, Sherry, I've got this idea for this book and I want to write a proposal and I want to start shopping it around. But honestly, there's no way I can do this without you. So let me know, like, if you're in, I'm going to write it. If you're not in, it's fine. Somebody else can write this book, And thankfully she was in.
Wow.
And talk about a spreadsheet. I mean, this thing is massive. It was our Bible for 3 years. It was main ingredient, country of origin, of course, developer, because I know we're going to talk about this. I worked with some contributors. I developed about half of them myself, and the other half, I worked with a variety of people on. So it had that. It had the, of course, link to the recipe. It had the link to the tester's notes. It had a link to the developer's photos, to the tester's photos, to the method. I thought that was really important for us to do with this one. So it was like, is it steamed or roasted or baked or fried or, and then we could sort on all of those different qualities and then see, where there were holes. And, I was filling all the holes. Yeah, it was huge. I could never have done it without that.
And I can imagine in the proposal, your recipe list was probably partial. I mean, there's no way you had this full recipe list.
Oh, yeah, no. I mean, I think I was lucky because I've worked with 10-Speed on a few books, and so they didn't require me to come at them with, this incredibly detailed outline. So, I think the recipe list was maybe 50 recipes, maybe. So, and I even think some of those changed,
I'm sure, yeah.
Right. I'm sure. They always change.
They always change, right?
Yeah. It's a fluid process.
Yeah.
What about Kristen Hartke?
Oh, Kristen is the best. She tested all my recipes for Cool Beans. She and we share a palette. I don't mean that we divide it between us. I mean that we have one that agrees.
No, but it's important because it's still your book at the end of the day.
So important.
Yeah.
So important. I mean, I've worked with recipe testers that I thought were good, but that we just had slightly different takes on food, and it's just not helpful. It's not helpful to have someone feeling like there's too much garlic all the time and everything if I'm a garlic head. It's not going to feel like me. if Kristen makes one of my recipes and she says, it needed a little squeeze of lemon juice at the end, I know 100% that it needs a little squeeze of lemon juice at the end. Like, there's no doubt in my mind. She's phenomenal. And she also develops recipes, and I've worked with her as a writer. And so she just gets it. She's been vegan for decades. She's very well versed in this type of cooking, and she had a lot to offer. So she was a huge partner on this book.
Did you have the chapter organization in mind at the beginning?
Yeah, I think I'm sure it was also one of those fluid things.
Because I have to say, when Andrea and I were talking about this, we were surprised to see breakfast as, I don't know why, but I was just sort of, it really takes you, literally, like breakfast to drinks, soup to nuts.
Yeah. Yeah, I think one of the reasons that I pretty quickly thought about breakfast was because it's one of those meals that's so, that in a traditional American breakfast anyway, it's so dependent on animal products. So I just knew that there was a lot there. And I wanted to help people with that, and I also wanted to show them that there's a lot of things that are very, very easy to make in a plant-based way. Like, there are these beautiful lemon blueberry scones that Kristen and I worked on. And they're, you use a vegan butter and that's it, and they're delicious. And there's no way that you would care. But yeah, I wanted breakfast for that reason. I also know that oats are so big in vegan cooking, and oats are also such a big part of a lot of people's breakfasts, and they're so great. And I just immediately knew that I would be doing some overnight oats and some other oats. And so then it was pretty much like, well, I guess I have a breakfast chapter.
Yeah, I was just thinking about your full-time job, your family. Now you've got a team that's working on this book. You also have a team that works for you at the Post.
Mm-hmm.
So is this weeknights and weekends? Is that when the book is happening?
Yeah, it's weeknights, weekends, and vacations. I took vacation when I was working on this book, but I didn't go on vacation the whole time I was working on this book. All vacation time was spent working on the book, which was tough. As you might imagine, it's tough because I need vacations. And one thing that's a little bit different too from this book, you mentioned that I had a team on this book and I have a team at the Post. With Cool Beans and previous books, they felt more like maybe different enough from my work that it would feel like a break to just go in the kitchen and be developing recipes. But it wasn't all that much of a break from my typical work to be managing contributors and editing a lot. And so, yeah, it was difficult. But that was also one of the most gratifying parts of the work. You both know, like, working with people can be so, when it's the right people, it can be incredible.
Absolutely.
And you can get a lot of energy from it. And you feel like you can riff with each other, you can brainstorm, you can come up with better things than either one of you would have come up on your own, honestly.
Right.
Yeah.
There also were times during this when I thought, maybe it would have been just as fast or faster for me to have done this all on my own, but I don't think it really would have. We wanted to do it fairly quickly because we did see a hole in the market. And the only way to do it more quickly would be to have some simultaneous work being done. I did a lot of prep phone calls with everyone. We had these long brainstorming sessions where I explained the philosophy of the book and the goals of the book and the types of things that I was looking for, and started talking about what they might do. And honestly, those conversations were so productive that when they came back to me with recipe ideas, and certainly then when they came back to me with the recipes, I was able to look at them and go, well, this is me. This feels exactly like something that I would do, which was important to me. I didn't want the book to feel like a compilation. I wanted it to still feel like it was mine, and that, I was kind of the thread and the voice through the whole thing. The only way that would work would be for me to sort of have this kind of mind meld with everybody. And that was really cool. It was really cool.
This is so interesting because a lot of times in these kind of teamwork situations, you hear about the lead author commissioning recipes from people. So the 300 recipes and mastering, you did half of them, so roughly 150. Now you have 25 listed contributors.
Yeah.
It's a lot of people.
It's a lot of people.
And they essentially pitched you ideas for this book.
Yeah.
And then you would figure out, well, what fits here and there like a jigsaw puzzle. How did you recruit, pay, and manage 25? I mean, you've got a team of people doing it, but still, I mean, I know you're a very detailed person. Please share your wisdom.
Well, it's interesting that you say pitch, because I guess that is partly the way it went, although I could imagine a scenario where, and I don't think it would have worked nearly as well, where I just put the word out and said, hey, I'm working on this book. Anybody who's interested, like, send me ideas. And I would have gotten a flood of ideas. And then, like you said, I would have had to have kind of seen where they fit and how they fit together. Instead, I sort of built it person by person.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought of all the people that I wanted to reach out to first, people that I thought had an affinity for plant-based cooking, whether or not they were vegan or vegetarian or omnivorous, but they had some kind of affinity for it. People who I thought probably had some time, like I didn't reach like up to so high to people that like, I knew were working on their own projects and would never be able to do anything. And then when I had the conversations with them, they were pretty open. It was me saying, here are the types of things that I'm thinking about. First of all, what do you think should be in a book like this? That was a really important question for me to ask people. And everybody had different ideas. But I also thought, like, okay, what are you really into? Like, what types of things are you really into? Do you get excited about? Are there aspects of plant-based cooking that really get you going? For example, like I used Ali Slagle, who's wonderful. And, she develops a lot for the New York Times famously, and she's done a lot of work for me at the Post. First, I was like, hey, are you available? And then she's like, I think so. Like, let's talk. And I say, we're having this fun conversation, and I'm telling her, sort of what I'm thinking. And she's like, well, what are you doing with salads? And I was like, well, I mean, I'm doing a lot with salad. I mean, I want a lot with salads. And I was like, you're a salad person. And she was like, yeah, I'm a salad person. And so she pretty quickly, we came up with this idea where she wanted to do a series of seasonal recipes where there were 3 different kind of simple ways to make something that's centered on tomatoes for the summer, on winter squash for the fall, on citrus for the winter, and on asparagus for the spring. And it was just a really great way to show people all the different kind of fairly simple combinations that you can do and different ways to think about salads. And I knew, I was like, yeah, that's great. That's really great. And we talked out some ideas about how to have some that were more raw, some that were built more on cooked ingredients. But she also, she just has really great ideas. Like, I never would have developed a recipe, I don't think, for a tomato and fig salad. And it's one of my favorite recipes in the book.
That's with the chili oil?
Yeah. Cherry tomatoes and figs with a smoky chili oil that you make on the stovetop. It just knocks your socks off. And it makes so much sense because, tomatoes and figs are in season around the same time. So why wouldn't they be together? They're both juicy. They're fruity. That one's sweeter, one's more acidic. Like, of course that's going to be good, but I had just never thought of it. So that's the kind of thing where as soon as we talked about it and I saw the recipe, like I thought, well, that's the kind of thing I would order in a restaurant. Like if I saw that, I'd be like, ooh, that sounds good,
Right.
But I wouldn't have thought of it. So that's sort of the process that I went through. And then as I talked to people, I also said, who else do you think I should talk to? Who else do you think I should talk to?
So that's the building it that you're talking about rather than, and that's how you keep it. My sense is that's how you keep it your own.
That's right.
It's very personal. It's
right.
Or an organic development. It's also interesting your decision to, or your editor's decision in terms of, like, if it were a straight up compilation, the recipe contributors' names would be on each recipe. And
Right.
you really have to sleuth around to find, like, you list the contributors up front. And I'm not saying you're not hiding this, but it's because it was I'm guessing a collaborative, or
That's
hearing
right.
that it's a collaborative period. So, for example, I go to that recipe that Ali inspired. Her name's not on the recipe, but it might be on another recipe.
Right.
So it's like these people pop up, they percolate through your recipes.
Right. And I think part of that was that I didn't want, I didn't want it to feel like a compilation. I also didn't want it to feel redundant. Like I didn't want
Mm,
to be like having these same names like appear over and over again. So I saved those for when the recipe was something that was personal to them,
right.
like where they had a story about how they developed it or what it meant to them. I tended to do it more that way.
That's so interesting.
Nowadays, accrediting people,
Yeah.
giving them the byline on things is, some people say it's incredibly important to them.
Yeah.
How did you negotiate that with the contributors? I mean, do they know that ahead of time, or?
We each had a contract. I had a contract with each of them. It was the same contract with the rate for the recipe and certainly the credit and that they would get a line with, we could say anything about their bio that they wanted. They got to write
Yeah, I
them.
saw that. You have Instagram handles, you have
Yeah.
various things. Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't think I know because we talked about it and it was in the contracts. I don't think they necessarily cared about being credited for each and every individual recipe. The other thing that's interesting is that I think I had one or two people who only did one recipe, and then there were people who, like Allie and I think Sarah Jampel, might have approached this much, where they did like 20.
Yeah.
That was also part of the organic nature of it. It wasn't like coming to them and saying, I want 12 people who each do 12 recipes, no matter what they are. It was, who do I like? Whose work do I like? Who's into this? Who has some good ideas? And what do they feel like doing? And what seems like it could work?
When you're working with them, it's spurring more ideas. And so then
Yes.
the original 5 turns to 10 because we've come up with, it's someone like Allie who's got 20 ideas for
Oh
every
my God, she
one of
could have.
mine. Yeah.
Yeah. It was crazy.
What about these essays? Those are so interesting.
Oh, thanks.
Some of them, are very political, Joe.
Mhm.
We talked about up front, like, we didn't want to like this to be like this strident thing, but we had opportunities for people to make those kind of lifestyle political statements.
Yeah.
And what was that decision editorially?
Yeah. Well, I mostly wanted to remind people of the history and cultural backdrop of plant-based cooking. So, for instance, Nico Vera, who's this fascinating Peruvian cook who veganizes traditional Peruvian recipes. I just thought he was so charming and talented. I certainly am very familiar with this idea of colonizing food. And particularly, it's a really interesting example with Central and South American foods because these are cuisines that I think we assume are laden with animal products. And I just wanted to remind people that before colonialization, they were actually eating a primarily, not exclusively, but a primarily plant-based diet. So I knew that he had done a lot of work with that. As like Bryant Terry is someone who's talked a lot about that with Black cooking. And I just thought that was an important kind of backdrop for people to understand that by quote unquote veganizing a recipe, you weren't necessarily whitewashing a recipe, or that there was a way to do it that wasn't whitewashing a recipe. You weren't stripping it. You didn't have to strip it of its tradition and its cultural significance in order to make it plant-based. And I thought that was important just for people who might be hesitant in that way. I mean, there is a lot of recipe content, as you know, out there that does kind of completely strip recipes from all context. And it can be really easy to fall into that trap, I think, sometimes. I mean, especially if you're thinking about veganizing, I feel like you need to be respectful of the recipe and where it came from. So that was really important to me, just to remind people of that. And it's also really the same reason why I talked to Joanne Molinaro about the essay that she wrote, which was concentrating on her visit to a Korean temple. It was kind of the same thing, like to remind people that there is this rich history. And in this case, it's not primarily plant-based, it's 100% plant-based in the Korean temple cooking that could be respected and venerated as a big part of plant-based cuisine. So I didn't want them to come across, and I don't think they do, like come across as strident, even in the way that they write them, even though they touch on political aspects of this. I don't feel like they're saying, here's why you need to be. That's what I wanted to avoid, like all the reasons why you should eat plant-based. Like I didn't want to do that. I feel like other people have done that. I certainly don't want to disrespect that. There are many reasons, good reasons to eat this way. I have very strong feelings about the reason why I do it myself, but I don't know. My father was a fundamentalist Christian, and it kind of scarred me. His proselytizing kind of scarred me. It made me really resistant to any attempts of people to do that with me. And I sometimes think that food choices are as personal as religious choices, There's like nothing more personal than what you decide to put into your body. And so I just have always resisted being told that I should eat a certain way, and I've tried to resist telling other people that they should eat a certain way. I kind of look at it like, well, there's this really, I don't mean to geek out too much on this, but there's this old kind of concept. I grew up in a Lutheran household, and I went to Lutheran elementary school, and there was this idea of witnessing, which was basically that if you lived your life in a certain way, at a certain point, people would come up to you and say, Joe, what is it about you? Like, what is it? Why are you so happy? Or why are you so? And then you would say, well, it's because, and you could then talk about your spiritual beliefs. What it kind of turned into, and what my father did that was so difficult for me, was he turned it into an active verb. Like it meant like going out, handing out tracts on the street, like telling people what they should and shouldn't do. I kind of feel the same way about this issue of your dietary choices. I think if somebody's really interested because they see someone who seems really healthy, or that, really happy, or that their food is really delicious, then they might be like, hey, what, like, why do you do that? And then you can talk about it. But I don't want to be the person that's stopping people on the street. I just really don't.
You grew up in West Texas. And so,
Yes.
I'm like getting this whole, image of your father, the handing out pamphlets and you looking away, humiliated, angry, ashamed.
Yeah.
And I have wondered why you are so committed to plants. But at the same time, ever since I've known you, we've eaten together and we've never had a problem.
No.
You're not one of those people who announces their preference for plants.
Right. Yeah. I just make my decisions,
And so in this book, I get this feeling of it as a resource for people to come to, as opposed to, although you could hit someone over the head with this book and cause some damage.
You would hurt them.
But the idea, and I do think it's interesting, sort of wrapping up this question about the contributors, is that you also allowed space for, because when I read those essays, I was thinking, why didn't Joe just do this research and then sort of summarize these essays in his introduction or something, or, you know, but because you've given us a bibliography, you've given us resources to find out more. But these 3 essays in particular you're giving voice to someone else's opinion. It's there. I could just go to this book just for the miso polenta and go on with my day, or I could go there and read about Alicia Kennedy's essay on no meat-based diet. So it's really, there's a lot of interesting choices that have gone into this. Can we talk about the cover?
Yes, please.
Talk about choices. Tell us. Tell us about that cover.
Okay. Well, how.
Oh, yeah, Joe, you and I had a long car ride once.
Yes, we have. We have had conversations.
Yeah.
So cover decisions are often excruciating, and there can often be conflict between the writers and a writer and the publisher. I really had a hard time imagining what single dish could represent all of plant-based cooking. And so from the get-go, I just thought, I just really think it needs to be an illo. I really could not imagine what it could be. And 10 Speed was very open to it from the get-go. There was a moment as we were coming to the photo shoot where we got a directive from on high, let's try some photos. And I was like, ah. And the photographer, I worked with the wonderful Erin Scott, and Lillian Kong is the best food stylist on the planet. They wanted an illo for the cover.
Illo is illustration.
Yeah, thank you.
Oh, yeah, sorry, illustration. If a photographer wants an illustration for the cover, it's probably a good idea. So we tried some things, and sure enough, everything that we tried, the images are gorgeous,
Mhm.
But it's like, okay, that says it's a tofu book. That says it's a pasta book. That says that all plant-based eaters do is eat salads. I would die before I would have a salad on the cover of Mastering the Art of Plant-Based Cooking, because that would have just been like, you're right, everybody. It's all rabbit food. You're right. I mean, I remember with Cool Beans, we had a plethora of great cover choices, and one of them was a hummus picture. And I was like, I'm never going to put hummus on the cover of this book. I'm sorry. And it was the same kind of thing. I can't do a salad. So then we started thinking about, well, there's the whole like beautiful plants or vegetables that we could do, like a montage of vegetables or a beautiful arrangement of vegetables. There's this inside cover spread that's a counter picture that has a really gorgeous cauliflower in it. And I just was obsessed with the way that the leaf kind of curls around the head of cauliflower in that picture. And I started just talking about, like, could we do that? We knocked out all of the photo possibilities one by one. I have an incredibly wonderful agent, David Black, who you sick him on people, and stuff usually happens. And so when we agreed that we would do an ILO, we were also really, everybody was so excited. And I just kept thinking about this idea of a cauliflower, just because, well, I love cauliflower, but also because it's pretty.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it says something maybe a little bit different than we've seen with a lot of plant-based cookbooks. Usually they're very green, in color. And so we thought, well, we want different color and we want to try a cauliflower. And so Betsy Stromberg, the incredible art director at 10 Speed, who's a genius with this book, I don't know how she fit all those recipes in there and still made them look elegant and beautiful.
Betsy can do it.
She's just a genius. She found this wonderful illustrator, Federico, and he kind of specializes in vegetables, or he does a lot that's really gorgeous with vegetables, and she showed me. And so we said, let's try it. And it was Lillian who was really suggesting the idea of purple, which we all immediately loved as something that would feel different from a lot of other books, maybe have it kind of jump out at you. He came back with these gorgeous images, and he had different ways of showing the florets, kind of in graphic ways. We picked the one we liked the best, and then I think the only thing that we really did is I said it was all very kind of geometric, the first iteration, and I asked him to mess up some of the leaves, like curl around some of the leaves and make it feel a little bit more lived in. And what I love about it is that people who know what that is know what that is. I think a lot of people don't know what it is, but it's intriguing and it's beautiful and it looks different from everything else. And hopefully it makes you go, huh, and pick it up and look at it. I think people like it. I don't know. I hope people like the cover.
Yeah, no, I mean, you want to pique people's interest, and that's the point of a cover. Molly and I wonder this all the time, and I think you do too. Looking back now that your book's out, would you do anything differently?
Oh man, that's such a good question. I mean, as I said, there were times when I thought maybe I should just do all these recipes myself, because the process of editing them all and getting them all into a consistent voice was very, very, very time consuming. They're all really good writers, but I mean, people write recipes in a different way. And I mean, I gave guidelines and everything, but I mean, you still, unless you have AI do it, which maybe the next time it'll be ready. I don't know. So there were times when I thought about that, but then I keep thinking about all the things that wouldn't have happened if I had done that. Sometimes I think that I could have done more like charts and breakout things like that in the book. That might be something that I would have maybe done differently if I had to do it over again. I did a lot of master recipes where I give you variations, because I feel strongly that part of something like this is helping people learn.
Absolutely.
Not just how to make this soup, but how to make soup,
Right.
It could have been interesting to break those out in maybe a more graphically, interesting way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, some things like that sometimes, I think. But that's about it. I kind of love it.
You know what? I mean, like few regrets is like the best position to be in.
Yeah.
And to kind of love it too after all of this. Really just just again, congratulations on it.
Thank
It's a
you.
huge accomplishment, and to set out to do that. And I hope you do get a vacation.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, this is going to be the
A
year of
real
vacations,
one.
I believe.
Thanks, Joe. It's great to talk to you.
Thanks, Joe.
Thank you so much for having me. I loved it.
Thank you for listening to Everything Cookbooks. For more episodes or ways to contact us, go to our website, everythingcookbooks.com. The show is available wherever you get your audio, and if you like what you hear, please do leave a review. It really helps. Any book mentioned in the show can be found on our affiliate page at bookshop.org. Thank you, as always, to our editor, Abby Circatella. And until next time, keep on writing, reading, and cooking.